All right, this is a follow-up to the video yesterday about Aristotle's intelligible matter as the same as yin matter in Taoist Neidon alchemy or Qigong, and I need to clarify some of these terms that I was using, but again, as Dr. Peter Kingsley points out, both Aristotle and Plato were wrong. And so the academic who is analyzing Aristotle's critique of Plato's form, the realm of forms, Platonic forms, based on number. The assumption is that time is linear, and so Aristotle argues that number for both Plato and Aristotle is based on time as counting, and it's that number is not dependent on a spatial measurement. But Aristotle then states that the Platonic form of two-ness as the indeterminate dyad, the infinite dyad, cannot exist before counting as a discrete unit of time, because the number 1 and number 2 are based on a linear view of time. And so Aristotle is pointing out correctly that this is a logical tautology and therefore a logical lie. And this was Gregory Bateson's big point about logic, about the what Bertrand Russell calls the error of logical type. So, for example, if a couple says that they want to have kids, they're making the error of logical type of not thinking of themselves as the larger class or order of humans as a whole. And so because humans don't think of themselves as a whole, therefore they justify having children on an individual level. And so this is what Gregory Bateson, his dad, William Bateson, coined the term genetics. And so he comes from this illustrious academic lineage, and Gregory Bateson also worked for the CIA doing LSD research and then being hired to do anthropological analysis of the indigenous tribes for the U.S. military to help, for psychological warfare. And okay, so at any rate, Gregory Bates in his book Mind and Nature, A Necessary Unity, he describes this air of logical type and how a difference is a difference that makes a difference is what the necessary crucial step that is required in systems theory as applied to mathematics and biology and everything else. And so that term, a difference that makes a difference, is actually from the logician mathematician Spencer Brown, who argued that the non-commutative number of the imaginary number I as the square root of -1 then solves the paradox of the Cretan liars paradox from ancient Greece. And this was Gregory Bates's big point, is that because time is not included in logical analysis in philosophy, therefore the Cretan's paradox cannot be solved in mathematics. So as Eddie Oceans points out in his quantum psychology analysis, that this difference that makes a difference is the non-commutative time. And this is also what math professor Lou Kaufman is explaining and emphasizing, that the non-commutative time as a phase synchronization that's eternal motion then solves the Cretan's paradox. And so what Aristotle and Plato or Aristotle's critiquing Plato about is the connection of Parmenides, who was a Pythagorean philosopher and one of the teachers of Zeno for Zeno's paradoxes and the Cretan's paradox, and that Parmenides was arguing that the one and being are different, and that this creates the two as the three, and from there you can have infinity from that dialectic. And this is quite amazingly the same exact argument as Chuang-Tzu being one of the early Taoist teachers, equivalent to Lao Tzu. And everybody's heard of Lao Tzu, but not many know of Chuang-Tzu, unless you really study Taoism. But he was the one who said that if you are dreaming you're a butterfly and your dream is just as real as being awake, then when you wake up, how do you know that you're not a butterfly dreaming that you're a human? And so the point being here that time is not inherently linear and sequential, and that just this is what both Aristotle and Plato were missing, and the paradox is solved by music theory, whereby time, as Alain Connes, the Fields Mental Math professor, points out, that time is not sequential, but actually it's a higher dimension of the future and the past overlapping. And so the number one, as Parmenides argued, is actually light as being. And so the difference is when we listen to the source of light, then we are logically inferring the source of one. And this is what Aristotle and Plato both argued, that the intelligible matter of the number one is therefore it's naturally achieved by a person just pondering the logical truth of number, and thereby pursuing a philosophy as a logical inference of the source of the number one. And this will naturally lead to the higher frequency of light. And so then what the real truth here is that Plato redefined a paron as irrational, or a logon magnitude, as this is what became the Greek miracle. And so he argued that the even as Aristotle's critique was that the number is internally comparable, but externally as a counting number, it's not comparable or non-comparable. And this is actually what the irrational number refers to as a logon, because there's no rational ratio for the square root of 2, but then internally as a rational fraction, it is an infinite divide and average process, or what they call a mutual subtraction process of inverse ratios. And so what the philosophers are missing, that they're stating that the Greeks knew that the continuum had the integers as natural numbers, as units, but also had the fractions as rational fractions. And therefore, this proved that the time was number was a sequential, based on sequential time, as an ordinal number system, and not a cardinal number system, as the Pythagoreans supposedly adhered to from the pebble counting system, where number was inherently geometric. But what they're ignoring is the non-commutative truth of music, and that even though Parmenides and the Timaeus of Plato that's being compared to with Parmenides they're both blatantly Pythagorean based on music theory. So the philosophers, by comparing Aristotle and Plato, are completely missing the truth of non-commutative phase as explained in music theory, as Alain Connes understands, the Fields Medal math professor. And so if you understand the non-commutative phase logic of music theory, this solves the paradoxes that Aristotle and Plato were both misunderstanding. But the problem is that modern science follows Plato, and Professor Sean Majid, the non-commutative geometry mathematician who studies physics, he's a mathematical physicist, or he argues that we need to return to Aristotle over Plato, based on the idea of number as a potentiality of the future that can guide the past, and that this intelligible matter is therefore inherent in the number one, that's not based on sensible matter, whereby counting is inherently tied to a unit of measurement. So, for example, the reason the Pythagorean theorem was not proven positively as a square root of 2 is because it would require number to be a unit measurement of distance, as connected to the geometric length of the areas of the sides of the triangles, the triangle for the Pythagorean theorem. And so the proof, as Charles Sayward and Philip Hugley point out, it's a negative proof, that it does prove that there are no rational numbers for the length of the hypotenuse, but that does not prove that there is a positive continuum number as the square root of 2, because that would require a counting number, a sensible matter of number as a unit, and the unit is tied to language, using the phonetic language. So, for example, the concept of thirds, fourths, and fifths are confused with the sequential linear time of third, fourth, and fifth. So that phonetically they're very similar, but they have a different meaning as a ratio in the first case, and as a sequential linear time in the second case for counting. But that proves that the Greek miracle was tied to using the phonetic alphabet to then create a symmetric one-to-one correspondence between number and geometry, as the origins of algebraic geometry, based on the power axiom set of the square root of 2. But again, what this whole argument is based on covering up the lyre of the musical instrument, the lyre, being flipped around by Philolaus in order to cover up the truth of the noncommutative phase of Pythagoras. And Timaeus of Plato was directly from Philolaus, and also Archytas. And so even Peter Kingsley does not understand the musical logic of Archytas and why Archytas was wrong, whereas and Philolaus was covering up the truth of Aperon as being the cosmic mother that cannot be seen and only listened to logically. And this was what Luigi Borzacchini calls the negative judgment paradox, because the truth can only be listened to in silence. And this is what's taught in Indian Vedic philosophy as Muna Samadhi, which is the secret of eternal liberation as an eternal listening process, as the highest level achieved in yoga meditation. And this is also what's taught in Buddhism as the neti logic, or the neither this nor that. And so in quantum logic, it's, as Eddie Oceans explains, it is neither A nor not A at the same time. And he says that solves the Cretan's liar's paradox, because it means that in quantum logic you can have something that is just because something is neither A nor not A, it does not mean that in each particular case of A and not A that they're not true. They can both be true on an individual level, but as a whole they can be neither A nor not A, and therefore the an empty set. And because it originates from music theory, therefore it's not just an indeterminate unknown, but it is, as Louis de Broglie realized, and Olivier Costa de Beauregard, it is a infinite harmonization of phase from reverse time and negative frequency. And so therefore the number one as light originates from a negative frequency and reverse time, so that the external time is slowing down due to relativity, whereas the internal frequency is negative, and the external frequency is going up, so that you're absorbing the virtual photons from the future as a negative frequency, whereas externally time is slowing down, and as the frequency goes up externally. And so this solves the paradox of what Parmenides was describing. And as Peter Kingsley points out, the Parmenides was actually a song to the cosmic mother, or whether it was Parmenides or the other teacher that he focuses on, Empedocles. And so the ancient Greek language was not it had, all the words had more than one meaning. And as Robert Schmidt pointed out, who he focused on Greek astrology, but he said that the ancient Greek language has to be understood as not a sequential meaning in the words. And so the ancient language was actually sung, and this was how history was maintained, was through a singing, right brain dominant singing, and so therefore the older languages, it is a musical based language based on frequency. And you find this in the Indian philosophy, where Ramana Maharshi, he actually spoke Tamil, which is an ancient frequency-based language. It's a more musical language. And so he explained that his Muna Samadhi, as silence Samadhi, was based on the undifferentiated triad of the three gunas. And this is also from the music theory Secret. But the Westerners, when they study non-dualism of Ramana Maharshi, they don't understand this at all. So they just turn it into a static one based on symmetry of geometry, and therefore they lose the whole secret of the teaching. And so this is what's happening when the comparison of Aristotle and Plato is made using Timaeus and Parmenides, is that they're completely ignoring the truth of the Pythagorean teaching from music theory based on the logical inference, as Socrates originally taught, that know thyself is based on listening to the source of the I as a thought. So that's all I'm going to say right now. Thanks.